All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our Ask an Advocate series. So this series is co-sponsored by the Women's Center at UW-Oshkosh and also the Student Health Center Health Promotion at UW-Oshkosh. And it's a series where we talk to different organizations about advocacy and what that looks like during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. My name is Eliza. I am the DEI Student Services Coordinator for the Women's Center. And so I am here just kind of to intro it, and I'm going to turn it over to Shatua Jong, who is our intern for the Women's Center and will be moderating this conversation today.
Thank you for the introduction, Eliza. So now we'll go into an introduction into our agency. So I would just like to know your name, your pronouns, how long you have been with your agency, and your educational background.
Sure, I'll kick it off. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Marianne Redley-Wellhouse. I use she, her pronouns, and I have been with Planned Parenthood for almost 3 years. I'll have my 3-year anniversary at the end of June. My educational background is a bachelor's degree from UW-Oshkosh. I had a psychology major and a women's studies minor. And then I got my master's degree in higher education counseling from Lakeland University.
And hello, my name is Molly Lancelot, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the community education manager with Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. I've been in this role for about 7 years. I had previously worked at Planned Parenthood in an education outreach role for about 5 years. And I'm based out of Milwaukee, though we travel all over the state. My education background, I'm surprised to learn, is similar to Marianne's. I have a bachelor's in psychology and women's studies from Beloit College, a private institution on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. And that's as far as I went. I have a bachelor's, and then in my role, because it is community education, we really look for people who have worked in community and know different demographic groups of people and are comfortable. And that experience is really a lot more important than a degree for the people that I supervise, as well as in my current role. So that's where the education is here. And that's what we wanted to know initially. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. And you kind of went into our second question already, but if you have any more to add, or if Marianne would like to answer, what are some examples of your job duties and what is your role within your agency?
Sure, I can go. Molly loved the similar backgrounds. Fun fact. So my job duties and my title, I am the Public Affairs Regional Coordinator for the Northeast region of Wisconsin. So basically that includes anywhere from Oshkosh to Green Bay, Sheboygan, and kind of northern Wisconsin too, if there is a need for information or resources up in the Northwoods. I don't do a ton of outreach up there, but I have certainly met folks from agencies that are outside of our typical, like, what if I say my service area, you know, I really mean the areas in Northeast Wisconsin where we have health centers, which is where we do a lot of our work. So Oshkosh, Appleton, Green Bay, and Sheboygan are where we have health centers up in this region. So I just do a lot of work throughout communities to build capacity, build volunteer engagement, engage our supporters in doing work that supports both the health centers. So we might get together once a month and make condom packets for distribution at our health centers or at outreach fairs. And then I also work on the Planned Parenthood advocates side of things, which is a separate 501c4 organization, part of Planned Parenthood that does political work. So we just had a couple really busy back-to-back election seasons with the fall election and then the election that just took place last week. So we also do a lot of organizing and community work around elections, working to raise awareness on the elections, get folks pledged to vote, make sure they turn out, do a lot of phone banking. Some people do door knocking, postcard writing, and just trying to help our endorsed candidates get elected, candidates that we know are going to support the work of Planned Parenthood moving forward, especially right now. in such a crazy time for reproductive rights. We've been just working really hard to do that kind of work too. And I should also add, I work from my home. I am based in Appleton, though I do serve, the greater region that I mentioned and do a lot of traveling.
So I'm in the education department, and within Planned Parenthood, a lot of people know us for our health services. That's our patient services department. But then we do have public affairs is a big department, education is a big department, and then all of our administrative staff make up the rest of our agency. So within community education and training, I'm part of a team of about 10 full-time staff, and then a bunch of volunteers and other part-time kind of youth supporters. I supervise all of the staff that do the English language programming. We have another supervisor and direction for our Spanish language programming. And the staff that I supervise go out into communities, into schools a lot of times, into other kinds of community-based environments like churches, after-school programs, boys and girls clubs, places like that, to teach sex ed. And we have a curriculum that we've written in-house based on national standards. And we can teach that as a comprehensive set of lessons that would be 8 to 10 sessions with the same teacher and the same group of students. Or we can do what we call our one-shots, where the health teacher calls and wants us to come and present all the birth control methods to their classes, or talk about STIs. So we do a variety of different ways to outreach. Our focus, similar to Mary Ann's, is any community where we have a Planned Parenthood health center is where we especially want to focus, so that we are not just talking about health information and how to make decisions in your own life, but also where to access healthcare and get more questions answered. So we are always talking about and directing people to the Planned Parenthood Health Center in their community, how to make appointments, how do you pay for it, what if you're under 18 and you want to access. So we do a lot of education that way. And other than supervising the folks that do that work and doing some of that work myself, I have a lot of meetings and a lot of emails and a lot of looking at contracts and getting permission to sign contracts and all sorts of, day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff that makes up work these days.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think something that I thought of when you were telling me about all the things that you both do, I thought of the term, it takes a village. Right. It really does take a village. And so I really appreciate the time and efforts that you all put into working on just kind of spreading the word about reproductive health. So going into our next question, what does advocacy look like for you, and how do you incorporate it into all of your roles?
Thanks for that question, and thanks for the comment about the village. I want to preface going into our panel here by just adding that my background also includes 12 years of work as a sexual assault victim advocate. So I worked for Reach Counseling, which I think y'all are going to hear from at a different Ask an Advocate series this month. I still try to stay really close to that work because in so many ways, when I was at Reach as a victim advocate there, and now as a coordinator, regional coordinator at Planned Parenthood, I really try to still see this work through the lens of sexual assault victim advocacy, because I do believe the worlds are so connected, especially when we're just talking about the very root of bodily autonomy. We have control over our bodies. We have control over what happens to our bodies. So in the reproductive rights world, in the sexual assault field, that's just kind of the foundation, right? So I just wanted to say that that is also part of my background, and that influences and informs a lot of the work that I do. But advocacy in this role does look a bit differently, just because I am not in a position of doing direct service work. So I don't have clients. I am not taking care of people in the same way, but our work is more systemic advocacy now. So we are working a lot of times on a regional or state level, trying to influence policies and politics in ways that are good for women and families in Wisconsin, and that certainly includes survivors. So we really are doing a lot of that bigger picture advocacy work rather than advocacy in terms of one-on-one support with an individual, which of course is always very, very important as well. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Yes, it seems that Marianne and I are living parallel lives. Perhaps I'm the unmarried, unchild, cat-loving version, and Marianne is the married, child-having version of our same paths. I've got 15 years in sexual assault survivor advocacy also as a volunteer, and did a lot of training around that. And so that does come into my work and always is something we consider. If we are talking about sex education and we are talking about it as something people have a choice and a decision to make, we have to recognize that that's not always the case. And there are absolutely people sitting in our rooms who didn't have a choice, who were forced to do something they didn't want to do. And we have to be very trauma informed when we're talking about this topic, because it can be very upsetting and traumatic for our participants. And so we always make sure that we have referral agencies for people who may need support, that people are taking care of themselves and excusing themselves as necessary, even in a classroom setting. And then just doing that education of helping people understand, like, these are healthy behaviors in a relationship and these are manipulative, controlling, unhealthy behaviors. And maybe you didn't understand the difference and you're becoming aware of a situation you're in that, or have been in. So a lot of ours is just informing, normalizing, discussing, offering resources. I've also joined a lot of committees more recently around human trafficking, both sexual and work labor trafficking, because that is coming up as the populations we serve in our health centers are those vulnerable populations who also have been at risk or have been pulled into trafficking situations. So that's a part of the information we need to know and share, and find the resources who are really specialized in helping survivors, because it is a specific kind of trauma that they need that resource for. So a lot of the advocacy is really around being aware and educating myself and my team, and then also allowing us to go forward and educate the people we work with. We also do internal training. So we also do help provide information for other staff, especially our client-centered patient services staff, around trafficking. How do you recognize a patient in your room who is saying things or giving you clues that there might be something going on? How do you react to that? What do you do with that? Where are your resources there? So we are also doing a lot of training so that our other staff can help to provide resources and intervene. And sometimes I think people want to know, like, well, aren't you calling the police, and don't you help them? And we have to remember, in all aspects of any kind of assault, especially sexual assault, giving the power to the survivor is the most important. Offering resources and telling them what we can do to help them, but not taking over their recovery or their path and journey, is really important. And so that is what we do. We ask questions, we give resources, we say, if you aren't ready to tell your full story right now, just know we're always here and you can always come back, and we will keep things confidential and work with you as you are comfortable. That's, of course, for adults in situations. We do recognize there's a different reporting system for people under 18 who are being mistreated, coerced, or abused. But that's a long version of advocacy in the education world.
Thank you so much.
If I could, sorry, I left out one of the components, and this kind of goes into the last question about advocacy as well as just typical job duties. I do work to engage individuals and supporters, but I also work to build relationships with other organizations in the area. So I do want to point out, like, that in this role of Planned Parenthood, I've also been working to build relationships with sexual assault centers, domestic violence centers, homeless shelters, anyone that, I mean, really any organization, but specifically organizations that are serving individuals that are at risk of sexual violence or work with people who have been a victim of sexual or domestic violence. So one of the things that we've done post the overturning of Roe is created these Make a Plan kits, which allows our organization to give resources, information to organizations. So I've been able to distribute condoms, pregnancy tests, emergency contraception to organizations so that they have these resources on hand to be able to give these out to the clients they serve. You know, because when we're talking about the homeless population, there's risk of survival sex. Well, you can stay at my house because you have nowhere else to go, but in return, you have to do these things, right? So making sure that people are equipped with what they need in order to be able to take care of themselves in less than desirable situations where they can, you know, have a dose of EC if they need it, or have a pregnancy test if they need it, just to be as on top of their reproductive health as they can while they're navigating other life circumstances.
Thank you. I think it's really important to show just the different ways that you can advocate for people and advocate for marginalized communities. I think when we think of the word advocates or ally, I think we kind of just think of one type of advocate and one type of ally. So thank you for showing me the entire world of what an advocate looks like and how it evolves too. And so another way that advocacy has evolved over time is with offering culturally specific services. So what are some examples of what you provide culturally specific?
Yeah, I can talk about a few of the specialized programs that we have, and Molly can either add what I've forgotten or expand on what I'm already going to talk about. So I will start with gender affirming hormone therapy. That is one service. It's one of our newest services that we've started to offer during the pandemic. Actually, in October of 2020, we started offering hormone therapy for our trans and gender nonconforming community members across the state. And we just had a presentation on this morning where we got updated numbers and data on how that program has been going. And so I can tell you that we've had 1,454 unique patients utilize this service in 2.5 years. So that's really incredible. Yeah, it definitely goes to show that there was a need for this in Wisconsin. Previously, you know, people were having to absolutely travel out of the state or incur large costs. And one of the beauties of services at Planned Parenthood is that if you are under or uninsured, we can work with you to make sure you get the healthcare you need at, a price that works for you. So we have been providing that service since October of 2020. We also have patient navigators that go along with that service as well. So some folks that can help our patients essentially navigate what this process is going to look like. Here's what you can understand. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you're going to need. And that's, its own beautiful form of advocacy in and of itself, right? Just like helping folks understand what happens next. Let's see. We just hired a new member of the public affairs team. She is our Black constituent organizer. So she is based in Milwaukee, but is going to be doing a lot of community building among Black communities across Wisconsin. Her and I have a meeting later this week to set up. Or we've set up a meeting later this week to talk about the different Juneteenth events that are going to be happening up in the Fox Valley. So I anticipate her getting a little bit more involved up here with that. With public affairs as well, we have the RAIS program, and RAIS is the word for root in Spanish, and the RAIS program works to promote community building among our Latinx communities around Wisconsin. So both educating and helping these communities understand like the services we provide, understand what's available in terms of reproductive health. And they did a lot of vaccine outreach too, earlier in COVID, as well as helping folks understand what's going on with abortion in the state now too. And they've also done, this RAIS program has done a lot of their own political advocacy work as well throughout their communities. And then we also just have a lot of bilingual staff throughout our education, public affairs, and our health centers in Wisconsin. So I'll let Molly fill in whatever gaps I may have had there.
One thing I wanted to mention was that the patient navigator for trans, non-binary, and gender affirming services is identified in that community themselves. And so that's really important that we have community members serving the communities that we work in. And we have a couple of different departments and staff whose sole job is to work within the communities that they are also a part of, including our community-centric office and work, that we make sure we hire people that live in the city or the town that they are, you know, working around, not coming from external, or are a member of the church groups that they're outreaching to, or things like that. So those are some ways that we try to make really sure our cultural humility is being enacted. We do a lot of training with our new staff around the different communities that we serve and how we specialize our services to meet the needs of different communities. Like adolescents, we consider a special population who need a special way that we work with them, and how we adjust our services and make sure that we are accessible to them. We also do have a very strong program in the education department of health promoters that are promotores de salud, and those are the Spanish speaking and some bilingual individuals who are consultants living in the communities that they are working in to teach that sex ed. They do teach around advocacy and healthy relationships, even cancer screening, and they were part of the team that helped with race, for information around COVID, information around when COVID hit and things shut down, was your landlord or your employer being fair and just to you? So again, the community is a part of the information. They help create the information and they find the resources within it. And so whenever we're looking for resources for anyone, be them trans, young people, survivors, whomever, we always try to make sure that our community partners are competent and well-versed in the populations they say they serve well. And we do, you know, call them and ask a lot of questions, and sometimes even have had people from the community whom they would be serving call and ask questions as a potential client, just to make sure that we aren't sending anyone anywhere that we aren't comfortable with. So we're always doing work. We always could do better. We are growing. And I think your next question about equity, if I can just swim on into it, the equity within our agency, the whole agency has been really, I think a lot of places have been really working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is the newest letter added to the list. And so we do have an agency-wide committee that is self-selected of participants from all departments, who can do things like bring cultural celebrations to the forefront, that we want people to be aware of, but also are looking at our HR policies and hiring practices to make sure that they are inclusive and equitable. And I think, you know, as an agency, a lot of that work is being done very widely. As an individual and a person who hires and supervises people, I try to make sure that my team is diverse and, again, inclusive of the communities we're working in, and that we also have volunteers and young people represented, because that is a large part of the population that we do serve, and they can also then at various times be the voice that we need around the table. We've also done things like community advisory committees before we started the trans and gender affirming care. We had a group of committee members from all over the state to help advise us on the information we were providing and how we wanted to market it and all of those things, so that they were able to make sure we were doing things in a respectful way that made sense to them. I'll stop talking.
Thank you for the beautiful segue into the question about equity. Marianne, is there anything you'd like to add about how you commit to equity within your agency?
I don't think I have anything else to add. Molly did a really nice job of like kind of putting into words, you know, just the work that like I think a lot of other nonprofits in the state have been on this journey. We do have consultants that help us along the way. I know when I first started, public affairs had their own person and org or like external org that we were working with to do our own work within our department. So it really is on the forefront of a lot of the work we do. There's a lot of diversity within our agency leadership team as well. So there's diverse experiences and backgrounds leading the way of our departments and our organization too. So that's just really important to have those voices and experiences up at the top level.
I definitely agree. Thank you so much for offering more insight on how inclusive and accessible Planned Parenthood is. I'm going to diverge from the script a little bit because I just have to know, both of you mentioned kind of things about how you conducted your services during COVID, during the height of the pandemic. I just want to know, what did Planned Parenthood look like and what did your advocacy look like during the height of the pandemic, if you want to go into that a little bit more?
For sure. So I know that I mean, I started like in the height of the pandemic, so I really don't know anything else. Molly can probably talk a little bit more about what like actual visible changes she saw. I started in June of 2020, so we were pretty peak COVID at that time. But I know like how things have kind of adjusted. I mean, I work in the community, so when there's really no community to be among because we're in lockdown or taking such strong precautions, it was difficult. I was doing a lot on Zoom. I would have monthly just kind of like drop-in meetings like, hey, I'm going to open up a Zoom room at noon on this day. And I would have like a good dozen folks come. And it was just a nice way for me to get to know people. And then I just tried to build a community within my, you know, new position with Planned Parenthood based, like starting with the organizations I already had relationships with throughout the Valley, just from the work I used to do. So now that well, let's see, I just really had to do a lot online. And that includes phone banking for elections. You know, we would hop on a Zoom room and people would make their phone calls from their houses, but we were all together on the screen. And I mean, it worked, but it was, you know, definitely not what I'm sure the agency was used to and not what I have to do exactly anymore as we've gotten to go back out in the world a little bit.
I think I can speak a little bit to not just the work I do, but the work that our health centers are doing, because we are an essential service clinic, you know, one of those that had to stay open, obviously, but we wanted to maintain the safety of our staff and our patients. And so the numbers of people we could see was reduced. You couldn't bring in your mom or partner or whoever with you in the waiting room. We were limiting numbers. Everybody needed to be masked. We had staff from our education and administrative offices who were able, with flexible schedules, to go physically sit in the clinics so that when people came in, they could ask the COVID questions, they could take their temperature, they could make sure they have a mask. And so that we were doing some screening to really assist our patient services staff with that extra step. For many months, we were getting people who wanted to donate masks, and we were needing to provide masks. And for a while there, it was hard to get mass-produced paper masks. So we had volunteers sewing and making masks, who would then mail them to our administrative offices, and I would take them home and wash them with gloves and unscented soap and no dryer sheets, and then package them into Ziploc bags so that we could give those and then send them out to the clinics so that a patient coming in could get a reusable cloth mask. Since we've been able, and we know that cloth masks aren't quite as effective at stopping germs as others, you know, we do provide obviously the purchased ones, as we're able to have many more of those now than we have in the very beginning. So just like those steps to try and make sure that folks felt safe and were accessible to the materials they needed. A lot of staff moved to work from home as they were able. Obviously, our patient services weren't able. We did have some accommodation with extra weeks of sick time for needing to be out of spaces if your children were sick, if their schools were closed. If so, a lot of staff were also dealing with the home life changes at the same time and not being able to physically be in their workspaces while their themselves were sick, their kids were sick, or somebody was out of school. So there was just a lot that had to happen, and we've slowly tiptoed back into the normal face-to-face day-to-day. I think a lot of us still are more comfortable in masks or outside. We had to teach education on Zoom, as we can do here, and you all, I assume, are reasonably listening. But when I'm in a class of fifth graders and they don't have their cameras on, and we start out with 30, and by the end of the hour, we're down to like 10 because they've just hopped off because they're just over it. That's a challenge, because we do try to make most of our youth education really interactive, and like they don't want to talk to us, or maybe their parents over their shoulder, or maybe they're doing something else entirely. We don't know. So that was an interesting pivot that is really beneficial in a lot of ways. We did find like we could have a wider audience. We could reach folks with mobile or transportation issues where they couldn't physically get to our spaces, but we could meet them online. So that was really excellent. But you know, we're trying to figure out that hybrid life now that we're all going to lead, I think.
Well, thank you for sharing the realistic ways that you all had to adapt. I don't think we talk about that enough. I think we've all been through this collective sort of traumatic experience, so we don't want to talk about it, but thank you for being so open and willing to speak about that with me. So moving that aside, what are some of the joys you've experienced working in your role?
I mean, last week's election, if I can, but really just bringing folks together that all care about a common goal. It's really, really fun and exciting. Like, I love being out in the community and meeting people and connecting people and just working toward a common goal, you know, whether that is something like big statewide level as the Supreme Court candidate that Planned Parenthood advocates endorsed winning, or if it's just like meeting a colleague for coffee and having a light bulb moment of like, oh, this is a way that we can work together. And it's small and it's maybe less on the radar, but it's super powerful for the people that are going to benefit from it. I mean, it's just really fun to be able to be in a role with like so much autonomy where you can really use you know, your own creativity and your own connections to make change. So yeah.
I think largely the joy I have day to day is the team of people that I work with, who I really enjoy and appreciate and feel very close to, not just as professionals, but as people who care about each other also. So that's like the main joy that daily keeps things going. There have been a few specific things that were kind of eye-opening and exciting, because in our role, we may go teach a class and then never know, you know, how did those kids turn out? What decisions did they make? So last fall, I was tabling outside at an event, and a young teenager came up to me and asked if I had taught at a certain school. And I said, oh yeah, I taught over there for a number of years. And he said, yeah, you taught my sex ed in 7th and 8th grade. And I just wanted to say thank you. Like, I learned a lot. It really was good information. And I was quite shocked and delighted and asked, how old are you now? What school do you go to? And this is a 16-year-old in a high school that's a Catholic high school, who said, my friends don't know this information. And now that he's of an age where it really is probably more applicable than it maybe was in 7th or 8th grade, realizing like, oh yeah, you weren't just telling us that stuff to torture us or to you know, embarrass us. Like, this is useful information that now makes sense, and now I realize my friends didn't get that in the same way. And so that was really delightful to just hear from someone who appreciated it and it meant something and he remembered it. So there are moments like that throughout the years that always just help keep you going.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I think something that both of you have talked about a lot during this half hour has been community building. And I think community building is so beautiful. It's so pertinent to our society today. And as somebody who is like going for nonprofit leadership and things like that, I hear it a lot. But if there's anybody listening who is in a role where they don't really think that community building matters, it really does. And so thank you for sharing that with us today. So what are some of the challenges you have experienced working in your role?
I've had people like not allow me to be at an outreach fair because I work for Planned Parenthood, you know, so students and community members not getting the information that is so beneficial because of somebody's beliefs or someone's views is challenging, because it's like information we all need, right, to understand and protect ourselves. So that's out there, and that is still a challenge. It doesn't happen often. It's only happened to me once, but it's a thing that's happening. But then there's like the higher level, bigger picture political challenges. You know, we had the really exciting election outcome last week, and then the thing that happened on Friday with the Texas judge putting like wanting to, you know, whatever it was with the one abortion pill. So there's always like big like battles that have to be fought. And sometimes that's on state and national stages, which I'm not going to be doing directly, but will definitely affect our patients, our community members across the state. So we can run into some little local challenges, but then we also have like those really bigger, those big picture challenges as well.
I've had, you know, similar situations. We aren't welcome at all places. I've been thrown out of schools. It's, you know, it is what it is. We're welcome in a lot of places, so we tend to steer towards those that invite us. But I think the more difficult challenges I faced is because I do value my team and want my team to be happy and successful. In years past, having people leave the agency who are looking for more opportunity than I was able to offer at the moment, or, you know, nonprofits aren't the highest paying jobs, even though they maybe should be, having to recognize that some people can't make ends meet and they can go work somewhere else and make more money. And though they're passionate about the mission and they know the work is important, the reality is we live in a capitalist society and we all got to pay our bills. And so losing people who were important to the team because they needed to move on or they weren't getting what they needed from the agency, and not having the direct control or power to be able to make those changes is always frustrating. And I think as we work towards equity in our agency, we're able to speak up about those things, but it also comes down to dollars and cents a lot of times, which is not why a lot of us do this work, but is a reality of all work. And so that's challenging, frustrating, and annoying.
I love that you were so open about the fact that it's annoying. You know, I get it. And it's really heavy. These challenges are a lot, and sometimes the challenges are way above our head, like Marianne was saying. So what activities do you utilize for self-care to prevent this vicarious trauma?
I like to work out. I like to be active. I saw Molly's face.
I like to eat candy. I like to lay on the bed.
I'm more of a salty snack person, so I will say it's popcorn and taco dip for me if I need to just like veg. But yeah, I like to try to be active. And now, I mean, you guys, it's like 76 degrees outside. So this is just life-giving anyway. Sometimes you just have to wait for that spring thaw to feel human again. But I also have a 3-year-old who is very intense and wonderful and lovely, but stays up late. So a lot of times when she falls asleep, I need to fall asleep. So it's finding the time to fit that all in, which can be challenging, but we also have a workplace that really promotes self-care. That's always like the number one thing when my supervisor is like, here's what I have for you, focus on self-care. So I'm probably going to go take a walk after this, you know? So like just being able to have like the wonderful and lovely like self-care focus built into your programming and to your organization as a value is huge. So I make it work.
Yeah, I mean, besides hobbies like watching trash TV and gardening and sitting outside with my cats, I talk a lot with either coworkers or my mom or friends if there's a situation that's bothering me, to be able to, release someone else's trauma and experience so that I'm not ingesting it. I think mental health care is important all around. I encourage my whole team and everyone I meet to see a therapist, get on medication if you need to. All of that I think is necessary. And as you mentioned before, we've all lived through a collective trauma, in addition to the other traumas that many, many people face day to day. And so I think finding your support is so important, and encouraging others to do that is a way that I keep myself moving forward and able to help. We know that burnout means you can no longer serve other people. And so if you want to keep yourself from that situation, then you have to be able to take those walks, to take a vacation, take a break, see a therapist, get your antidepressants. I started those over COVID, got some stuff because I wasn't sleeping well. That's a really important thing that in my younger days, we don't prioritize sleep. And now, I mean, trying to sleep for 8 hours a night keeps me from getting sick, even though I'm immune suppressed with chronic illness. Keeps me going in ways that I don't think I found the value in it in my younger days. However, turning your brain off so you can sleep is the next challenge of middle age. So that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, I can't turn my brain off now. So knowing that it's still an ongoing journey, not super excited, but thank you for sharing how you incorporate self-care into your daily routines. I know that there's probably a lot of students here, a lot of like UWO students here. So listen to these two folks. They know what they're doing. So my last question for you is, how can individuals not in a formal advocate role support victims / survivors of sexual assault?
You said not in an advocate role? Yeah, plenty of ways, right? Like, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about the world of sexual assault services, sexual assault victims, sexual assault as a crime, to be cleared up. And people can always like challenge their own biases to like be more understanding, be a better support person, care for their friends better if someone would come to them, and saying that something had happened, and just educating yourself on the resources that are available too, because we can't and should not be everything to everybody. So it's important to be able to provide support, to understand the issue, and also to be able to refer to professionals for help. There's obviously volunteering and volunteer ways to support organizations, whether that is by like learning to become an advocate yourself and providing that direct service work, or helping out sexual assault centers in a different way. Nonprofits always need helping hands of folks that, are extra, and, people from the community that aren't working for the org, because there is so much work to be done. And there's always like donations, because we all have our different strengths, and some people have more money than they have time, and nonprofits also are seeking donations. So lots of ways.
as an individual, we always say in the survival world, believe them. If somebody tells you something, believe them, and don't question what they were doing or why they went to a place or any of that. Believe them without question. I've seen more, and I think it's more on social media these days, where somebody has been accused of harassment, abuse, assault, and their social group may say, well, I couldn't see them doing that, or that doesn't seem like something so and so would do, which speaks to the victim, that you're lying and I don't believe you because I don't think that person would have treated me that way, or I've never seen them act that way. And though it may not be said to the victim themselves, other victims in that circle see that comment and know what that means, that you aren't trusted, that you blame folks for assaults they've experienced, and that you don't recognize that people can behave different in different scenarios and can be very controlling and abusive to some people and delightful and charming and respectful in others. And so that's part of educating yourself around rape culture and toxic masculinity and all of those systems we all live in. And then, find a resource for a friend if they need it. Go to a resource yourself if you need to talk to someone or aren't sure. There are hotlines you can call, and just say, I'm a concerned friend. My friend told me this, or this is going on and I don't know what to do. And you can use those resources too. There is a question in a chat about if someone were assaulted and went to a clinic, what resources would Planned Parenthood provide? And that does happen. People come to Planned Parenthood for emergency contraception after an assault and don't want to go to a hospital, don't want to do an evidence, and so we certainly can refer and would offer, hey, if you want to do this, here's where you can go locally. But if people are just like, I just want this EC and I want to move on, then that's their choice to do so. But there are physical resources and online or phone resources that we would offer someone, and we do have little flyers and pamphlets so that people can decide later if they want to reach out for a resource. But if somebody comes in and says, I just need EC, and we don't get into what happened or why, or if they tell us, we certainly will offer those counseling resources because we want them to know that they are available. But usually they're making the choice to come to us over that, fully knowing, sometimes not. So we do educate them if they aren't aware of other things they could choose to do.
I also just want to use that question as an opportunity to talk about the status of abortion in Wisconsin. So obviously survivors can come to Planned Parenthood for emergency contraception, of course, if they don't go to the hospital for an entire sexual assault forensic exam and get the EC that way. But if, some weeks later, the survivor realizes that they got pregnant, that they became pregnant from having been assaulted, Wisconsin we paused indefinitely abortion services last year when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And that is because of an old 1849 law that's on the books in Wisconsin, that Roe was the only thing preventing that from being current law. There's lots of lawsuits fighting that, lots of details that I don't need to get into, just to tell you that if you are supporting somebody that became pregnant from a sexual assault and they want to explore abortion care, still call us. So call your local health center, call the number that will get you through to a health center to schedule an appointment. We have patient navigators, abortion patient navigators. So they can help you figure out logistics of where you would need to go. So we're working really closely with Illinois and have some of our own clinicians that have gotten licensed to practice in Illinois to help the overflow, because Illinois is getting a ton of patients from neighboring states that have lost abortion access. So we cannot provide the service in Wisconsin. We can provide before care and after care, and we can help you figure out where to go based on your gestational age or how far along you are. So don't, think like, well, Wisconsin can't do it, so I shouldn't even call Planned Parenthood. Still call Planned Parenthood and we can help you figure that out.
Thank you for adding that in there, and thank you, Eliza, for the question. So I guess that segues nicely. If there's anybody else in the audience who would like to ask a question, you can either turn on your mic and ask, or you can also put it in the chat and we'll give you some time. In the meantime, while here's a question right away. Okay, so why did you choose to go into this kind of work?
It just kind of happened. So I was going, like, when I started my women's studies degree, or when I took my first women's studies class, like pretty much by accident, I just needed an English requirement. It really changed the whole like path of my education and what I wanted to do. I got more involved in women's studies stuff, Women's Advocacy Council. I was a co-director there many years ago at UW-Oshkosh, and it just kind of evolved. So I was in graduate school. Like I said, I was going to go for counseling. I started volunteering at Reach during that time. Then the woman who hired me left. I applied, got the job. And then kind of same with Planned Parenthood. I knew somebody that was in my position. They were like, hey, you should apply for this. And I did, and I got it. And reproductive health, sexual health, bodily autonomy, all those things. I mean, it's like a value set. So I've just been really fortunate and blessed to have things kind of work out in this field for me, and being able to build the community I've been able to build. But it's just, I've been able to apply like my values to the work I've done and volunteering. I was also a volunteer for Planned Parenthood for a long time. So there is really something to be said about just getting involved with orgs that do work you're passionate about. And yeah, the rest is history.
I think back when I was also a college student, there was not the field of public health to study yet. And so I was looking towards kind of public health work or counseling, maybe some kind of youth work, but didn't have that field yet to step into. I was a resident assistant in college and then became a hall director for a few years after college. And that started my journey into like sexual assault survivor advocacy, as well as just mental health issues facing young people. And what I was seeing was that college age students were doing things to the best of their abilities as the way to manage their mental health conditions that were really unsafe and unhealthy. So excessive drinking, eating disorders, a lot of self-abuse and cutting, things like that. And I just felt like, why don't we talk to kids when they're in 7th or 8th grade before they start these behaviors, or when they're considering and trying to figure out ways to self-manage their negative feelings, so that they have a better tool or they have a resource somewhere. And so that just sort of kept going into finding a way to be involved in, we need to educate people earlier. We need to help them understand the resources and who to go to for help when you're struggling. We need to make that okay to say it's perfectly normal to have depressive feelings, to feel like you don't want to get out of bed, to be miserable, but ask for help and tell someone, because you don't have to continue that path for decades before you need to be hospitalized. So that's sort of where my role, and then I just accidentally stumbled into sex education. I didn't know that was a field. And I realized I really like talking about this stuff more than I want to talk about dental health or bullying. I want to talk about sex ed because that is something that most people are pretty interested in. And a lot of people are very nervous talking about these topics, and I'm not. So So it was also kind of accidental, which I think a lot of us find in our career paths.
Thank you
Oh,
so
I'm seeing another
much.
question. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Medical obstacles.
Mhm.
Let's see. What are some of the biggest medical obstacles you have seen when it comes to sexual assault victims or those who seek Planned Parenthood help?
I don't know that I have a really good answer for this on the Planned Parenthood side of things. Just because caveat, I don't work in a health center, so I'm not often privy to what goes on in that side of things. I can what did come to mind, and this was back when I worked at Reach, and I certainly don't know how things are now, but just the availability of forensic nurses for victims. You know, there was oftentimes where there maybe wasn't a nurse on because they're a very specialized nurse, like they have very, very specialized training to be able to do these forensic exams. And so they wouldn't be available until the next day. Or, you know, earlier in my career, survivors were having to drive down to Milwaukee or up to Green Bay to get a SANE exam done. So there were oftentimes gaps in services. And in that time, you know, you're at the risk of losing evidence, you're at the risk of the patient changing their mind. And so maybe they're not going to go through with it because, oh, it's been 8 hours or I have to wait that long, I'm not doing it, you know? So that was always a really big challenge. It got better, certainly, as my time at Reach went on. So I hope it's still going well. I know the pandemic really threw a wrench in a lot of victim services throughout that time, but that is one major barrier I could speak to. And I mean, Planned Parenthood isn't open 24/7 either. So if people did want to choose us as their go-to at 2 a.m., that would be another obstacle too, right? Like we're not a specialized sexual assault center or have SANE nurses, so we wouldn't be able to provide that service.
I'm thinking of, I agree wholeheartedly, Marianne, with all of those points. I'm also just thinking about seeking reproductive health care in general, and especially around people who are survivors of sexual assault, the guilt and shame that people feel accessing or telling their truths or describing what happened, whether it is just a relationship they're in and a thing they're interested in or something that was done to them. I just think the inability for this culture to be non-judgmental really impedes people from asking for help and for saying what's really going on without, maybe filtering it through the what I think you want to hear as a medical professional lens, which is why some of our peer-to-peer counseling opportunities that we have in some of our health centers are super important, because patients would be more likely to tell someone their own age who is not a nurse or a clinician than maybe tell the nurse, yeah, I'm with this partner and I don't feel safe, but I don't know that anyone else is ever going to love me, or whatever the situation may be. I think just accessing this kind of care and not feeling bad about it is really hard for a lot of people.
Well, thank you for your answers. And thank you, Ellie and Mackenzie, for your questions. I just want to plug in with Mackenzie quickly, though. Next week for Ask an Advocate, we're actually interviewing Reach Counseling and a SANE nurse, which is the sexual assault nurse examiner. So if you'd like to come next week for that, you totally can and learn more about that. But Sherry K also has a question. So does Wisconsin have the emergency departments equipped with a SANE nurse for after hours emergent need?
Yeah, so I think that would be Sherry. I mean, awesome question. And I think would also be a great one to have addressed next week with Reach and Aurora SANE. But basically the answer is it's dependent on the hospital's willingness to invest in training their nurses to become SANE certified, if that makes sense. So it's not a statewide thing. It's an individual hospital thing. They have to agree to say, yes, this service is very important and we should offer it for the community. So like, for example, Aurora has an actual SANE coordinator. Her name is Brenda, and she's amazing. And she trains all of the new forensic nurses. Okay, cool. So You're in Colorado, our hospitals are supported. Yeah, fabulous. So yeah, it comes down to individual hospital support, and how much money they're going to spend on training their nurses and paying them to be on call and different things like that. So since it is like it's like an extracurricular, right? Like an ICU nurse could also be trained to do SANE work and be on call to go to the ER. So it's not just like across the board. It is really individual hospitals. The Fox Valley has had good coverage. I just can't speak to what it's like now.
And same here in Milwaukee, we have the Aurora Center is where all the hospitals defer to. There's also Children's Hospital does SANE exams for children, and Ascension has a mobile unit of SANE nurses now, but other ERs that you go to may not have them on site and might need to send you to a different location, or you might need to wait. So that is dependent on, and other smaller hospitals in other areas, my guess is the access is not that widespread. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anybody wants to get in touch or has additional questions, you're welcome to email me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for both putting in your emails, and Kim also put in the link to the last Ask an Advocate we did last week. So we are up to our 1:40 time. So thank you so much, both Marianne and Molly, for coming and speaking today. I hope everyone watching has learned a little bit more about advocacy work and has a drive to support in any way that they can. Please join us next week for the third installment of the Ask an Advocate, and then the last one too. So I appreciate all of you for being here. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and enjoy the beautiful weather.